What's it really like behind those big bright lights? Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm so happy to be back here with you all, and I cannot wait to dive into this week's conversation. This week's conversation is one that I've wanted to have for a really long time, and I needed the right person to kind of step forward to embrace this theme and kind of embrace the nuance around it too. And that person is Miss Holly Hughes. My guest this week, Holly, she is a TEDx speaker, award-winning author, and intuitive healer. She also has a past in production within film and TV in LA. She draws inspiration from her journey, which you can imagine by her little one-liner there, has had many twists and turns, and her life experiences into public speaking, writing, and healing practices. So we go deep into her experience behind the cameras of LA, and she tells some really poignant stories about her time there, what it was like kind of chasing that life, and why she chose to leave it. We go into the whole idea of celebrity. We go into the idea of fame, experiences we've had within that world, and maybe the highs and lows, and kind of discuss how to kind of create impact and get your name out there whilst also staying fulfilled and really staying in alignment with what you value and what you want most, and in turn then creating a really fulfilling future and a really fulfilling success for yourself, and how that's not always the case within the Hollywood space. We also, as I said, dive into why she chose to leave, her journey as a writer and a published author. We go into the whole book journey and what it's been like now channeling her creativity in that way. And also now embracing her kind of talent, I would say, for intuitive healing, and what it's been like kind of now going into the more healing space, working with creatives and people of all kinds to guide them towards a life that they really dream about. So this is such a great conversation, and Holly is such a magical soul. So I cannot wait to introduce you to her. Miss Holly Hughes, a massive warm welcome to Maverick Mind. Hey, Holly, a massive warm welcome to Maverick Mind. Such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited about the conversation. I always love the pre-conversations when I do podcasts because there's always some amazing, interesting bits in that as well. So I really liked being able to tap into your creativity and adventure. That was like amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I kind of wish sometimes that I record those bits just to kind of put out as, like, I don't know, whatever the opposite of a blooper is, like the
That
golden
would be good.
nuggets series that come out before we hit
Mm.
record. But yeah, we'll get into me later. I'm sure the audience know a lot about me, but to begin with, let's tell them a little bit about you. There's a lot within your story that would take a long time to unpack all at once. So let's go with the first chunk, like your journey into the world of Hollywood. Like, how do you remember, like, when you were a child, was acting something you were always really into, or was it
Never.
just a?
I was never in front of the camera. I was always a dancer. I'm a dancer. That was like, I think my first creative language was with my body. I still dance to this day. I think I have a lot more aches and pains while I do it. And sometimes I judge myself that I'm not moving like I'm 20, but I am far from 20. But I love it. I take classes every week, and there is still just nothing as miraculous and freeing for me than dancing, especially since in that venue, I am not in charge of anybody else. Right. I get to just be creative and learn and deal with all the frustrations of not being as good as I want, right? As any creative person always feels, right? So I started dancing, and then I started writing. When I was young, I was writing all the time. As I got older, there's engineering people in my family and plumbers and all sorts of other things. And so my mom was an artist. And back in the day, she's like, I don't know how you make a living as a writer. And of course, she doesn't remember saying that to me, but I have such a distinct memory of it. So I thought I could only go to school for journalism. So I went to school for journalism and history. That was my major and minor, and in the States. And when I graduated, I got my first credit card, and it said you could go anywhere in the contiguous United States. So the furthest place I could go was Los Angeles. And I had a friend who lived there, and I said, "Can I come visit?" And he said, "Sure." This is how I ended up in LA. And I just went to visit and I loved it. I loved it. And then I went back. I was living in DC then, Washington, DC. Went back and I wanted to just go back to LA. So I left my roommate 4 months of rent, packed up and moved and crashed on my friend's floor. And then I moved into a flat or an apartment with four guys and me. It was a pigsty, but that's all I could afford. And they were all friends of my other friend. And I just called a company. It was called Chanticleer Films. And I knew someone who got an internship there, and I didn't think they were that smart. I mean, honestly, that was my thought at 22. And I was like, "Are you hiring?" And they said, "Can you come Monday?" And I said, "Yes." And I flew out Friday and started Monday.
Wow.
So I have a bit of an adventure in me, like, because even then, even with all my insecurities, I was like, he could do it, I could do it. Right. And my friend was also like in the industry in a different way, but it was crash course in learning so much about film and TV. And I think in that creative journey, I doubted my own abilities. So I went the route of producing because I could see how good other people were. And I was really organized and the most ridiculous people pleaser. And so LA in that creative pool, there's some genius, but it's a lot of wounds. A lot of people with a lot of wounds. And so I kind of thrived because I had the same ones.
Yeah, for sure. That like first time that you visited LA and you said
Mhm.
that you loved it, so you had to kind of had to go back. Can you remember what it was that you loved about it?
72 degrees. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but
Neither do I.
it was lovely and delicious. It was mountainous. It looks a lot like Spain. I don't know if you've been to LA. So it looks a
Yeah.
lot like Spain. So mountain and I don't know. I loved everything. So growing up where I grew up, I was always a little quirky. Like even now, sometimes when I meet people who knew me when I was young, they're like, "You were like weird." But in LA, I'm not, right? I'm so not. And it's not that I was weird, it's that I have a creative personality and a creative, you know, view of the world. When I look at things, I look for the beauty. I look for whatever. I'm watching how people react. I'm watching how color hits things. I love fashion and clothes. Like, so for me, it was everything I ever wanted in like one neurotic city. So the ocean was beautiful, the mountains. There wasn't anything. The food is amazing. There wasn't anything I didn't like on the surface. When you get past the surface, it's a deep, dark well, but it's amazing. I mean, I spent 18 years there.
Did you kind of know what you wanted to do when you got there, or was it
Yeah.
just
Oh yeah, I'm a
like,
girl with a plan. But God blows those up. So when I moved out there, I had a 5-year plan. In 5 years, I was going to move up. I was going to coordinate, produce, line produce, then like be a big producer. My dream was to pull up to the Oscars in an open air Jeep with my hair all messed up in a divine gown, right? Win best producer. I was going to know who I was going to marry by 23, get married. I think by 24, a kid 26, 28, and 30. That like those were all my bizarro dreams at the same time. Um, I'm yeah, that and then I worked really hard towards that. I just, you work 20-hour days. I know there's a lot of people who do like the Hollywood scene, but I didn't because I was working.
yeah, that's I guess a different kind of Hollywood scene though.
Mm, low budget. I did a lot of low budget. It was
Yeah.
much like before cable and everything else. And there was no way to get your creative ideas out because there weren't as many venues then. So you had A-list movies and you had B movies.
Mm.
right? And cable, like HBO and Showtime. That was it, right? And Cinemax, I think. So the channels were much fewer, and so you really had to like pay your dues. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I have a few friends and met a few people that work within film in the UK. And a lot of them that now do production, they had to start with signing their life away to being a runner for
Yes.
years and years.
Yes. I mean, you work a 12 to 14-hour day, and then back in the day it was film, and then you had to do the film run, which was another hour away, and drop it off. I'm like, you're putting me in charge of this? I haven't slept in like forever. Like that. The choice is, oh, and you're paying me $50 a day for all of that work. Yeah. This is insane. It's like you have to want it. And I really did want to like prove myself. And back then, I gave all my creativity away. If I was working with someone, I just told them my ideas and they gobbled them up, but they didn't promote and they didn't help me like really get to where I want. I can even tell you that I had stepped away for a little bit, right? After, I don't know if you read that essay that I wrote about being harassed on set. So I had stepped away from filmmaking for a while. And then my friend was doing a Food Network show, and I had moved back to LA, and they were like, can you just help? I was like, sure, I'll help. And then it was the very beginning of reality television, which I know many people can't imagine the beginning of it, but I was there.
Yeah,
And they
I
didn't pay
remember.
you,
I
and
remember.
they wanted me to produce, location manage, and like other stuff. I was like, and pay me like $900 a week. I was like, no. First of all, I have 15 years experience, and the answer is no. But I wanted to pitch a dancing show. And this was like before Dancing with the Stars or Strictly Ballroom, wherever you are in the world, right?
Mhm.
And they were like, no one's ever going to buy that. And I believed them, and I was so wrong, and I could kick myself. I could kick myself so hard. So if you have an idea, so what if someone says no? You don't know where the yes is until you try.
Yeah, I think that there's when you have that idea that sort of haunts you a little bit. Like that's like something in you saying like this needs to be expressed somehow. So
Mm,
they're the kind of ideas that we really need to just like keep batting down the doors for. I mean, as creatives, we have like thousands of ideas in a day that some of them you just never remember ever again.
I write them all
But
down. Like my screen here on the other side is all post-its. It's like
yeah, yeah. But then you read it like a few months later and you're like, oh no, that's definitely not that. But the ones that kind of haunt you a little bit and that kind of like really kind of set your body on fire, they're the ones I think that there's some other entity somehow is giving us that nudge to say this really needs to be
for
expressed at
sure.
this time.
For sure.
Sure. I mean, things like for that idea, Strictly Come Dancing in the UK has been the biggest TV show in England for since it started.
I know. And
Well, it
there's
was
like
it.
dance moms too. Like there's a million dance shows. And my
Yeah,
show, my idea wasn't so different. It was really about getting people who once danced back in the room and to see how it changes them. Right. And
yeah,
like it's still probably gold. No one steal it. It's mine. I'll find you.
yeah,
But I also know plenty of friends. I have plenty of friends who pitched bigger companies. I'll just call them that, bigger production companies, and they stole their ideas even after a pitch meeting, right? And then they just like they change one time because you can't copyright ideas.
yeah. Exactly. That's the hard thing about being like creative sometimes, especially when sometimes there is an element of having to give your power away a bit, to a production company or
Mm,
to in so many different creative fields that sometimes we have to kind of someone has to anoint us with the permission to create what we want sometimes
yeah,
or have your art somewhere, and with that does run a risk of, well, two things. I'd say one being your idea being stolen by that person, and also when you constantly have to wait for someone to give you the permission or say that's a good idea or anoint you with the permission to do it, it's when you don't have the control within your own hands, it creates a lot of anxiety, I think,
It does.
especially
Some
within the
people think
worlds of,
that's what makes good art sometimes, though, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm like, especially on sets, right? Some people like a hostile set. They think that that anxiety and that energy creates better performance. There were a lot of people like that. And a harmonious set and an easy shoot makes a bad product.
Wow. Do you think you've
Mm,
seen that within like sets that you've been on, or would you
A
say
hundred
not so much?
percent.
Well,
A hundred
interesting.
percent.
Interesting. So sometimes a little bit of anxiety is a good thing. I remember my dad used to work in advertising and he'd been on loads of sets and he'd always used to say like you have to be on the balls of your feet. He's like if you're on the balls of your feet, it's like not like a anxiety, but more like an urgency or like a
Hmm.
an energy or an upbeatness
Yes.
about you. It's like you always have to be on the balls of your feet when you're doing things like that. So I guess it's kind of a similar energy to my vibe in a yoga background is a bit different.
Yeah, it's the opposite. It's the
Yeah, it's
opposite.
like let's
I know it's
chill.
hard to walk away from that because a lot of people, like I spent 18 years building my career. That's like, that's a significant part of my life. And I walked away because my ego no longer screamed for that validation
Mm,
from there, that like I recognize the pain of that environment, the discomfort for me, the not really getting where I wanted because I really don't have a bullshit meter. So I am not one who can blow sunshine up your butt. I am not really one with the energy because I'm an expressive introvert, so I'm really an introvert. So being around people, it becomes exhausting for me. So like if I just spent like 16 hours with you and now I have to kiss your ass, I just can't, right? So
yeah.
I think if you are much more schmoozy and care, if you are at ease of being charismatic and playing the game, then then you will have much more success. I was in Hollywood during Harvey Weinstein. If I tell you what was going on, do you know what I'm saying? So what are you willing to do? And I did get thrown on a table and dry humped in front of the crew. I mean, like
Wow.
I had people say and do the most insane things to me. So at some point, I was like, I can take it. Like that's what always got me through. I could take it because what I want is worth it. And then I got to a place of healing, like honestly, like Saturn return, my 20, like when I was 28, I
Mm,
was like, I don't want to do that. So what, I could take it. Why would I keep putting myself in this abusive space? So when
mm,
Hollywood is always telling you how to live, and I know what goes on with them, I'm like, are you the people really telling us how to live? Because we know what y'all are doing, right? So I step back, and when I step back, and my husband and I actually moved across the country to North Carolina, which was, a massive change in every single way for me, culturally, physically, like everything. It is also when my creativity, my own writing, which I had gone back to, I owned it and I started selling stuff. I got asked to fly back to LA and perform in a play, right? Like it was kind of madness. I was like, oh my God, I lived there for 18 years and I got to be in this play. It was back in the day. I don't know if it still exists, but it was called Expressing Motherhood. And like some people who are huge now were in it, right? Is amazing. And basically we were telling our own story of motherhood. And like I said, I was never one in front of the camera. I've always been much more comfortable behind. So for me to step on that stage and everyone's like, how come you're not talking loud? I was like, I'm scared because, it wasn't what I was used to. And then I crossed those hurdles of owning my own voice and ultimately getting social media. I mean, I'm very emotive. I know you have videos, so you'll see my face moves, my hands move. And when you do public speaking, you have to like tone that down because that can be too much to watch. So my own nervousness or whatever, I would just kind of shut down. And then I had to learn to be authentic, who I am. If you want me to speak to you or with you or whatever, you need to know that you are going to get a creative and an emotive and emotionally vulnerable human.
yeah.
And I'm not going to not do that. That is who I am. That is my art. That is my writing. That is how I go about it. And I am no longer really willing to give it away like LA. traditional publishing, if anyone here is listening, that's like another thing. I did the work. I got an agent. I wrote several books. I did the query. I did all the stuff. And then during COVID, she and I went our separate ways. But for me, that industry as well is a little caught up in the past, and it really is not thriving the way it could because they're like, this is how we do it. But the world doesn't operate as it did in 1900. So I think there's a paradigm shift that I wish would happen there as well.
Yeah, for sure. We had a few people on the podcast that are self-publishers, and I'm interviewing somebody else who's a more traditionally published author.
Mm-hmm.
And I also had a publisher on here who helps people self-publish,
Mm-hmm.
or do the marketing for their self-publishing anyway. And yeah, that's a really interesting thing. But I kind of want to backtrack a little bit to that like Saturn return time of life,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I think that it's a really common thing. And I definitely had this as well. This is when my last business, I decided to close my fashion business, was around the same time, 29,
30.
30.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a really something I've never spoken about on the podcast before or anywhere else, I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong, people. But it's a quite an interesting thing of, do you think that there was an event that happened that kind of led to that unraveling of the way that you were thinking about what you were doing, or was it
A
just a
100%.
slow process that kind of slowly started to question everything?
It was it was multiple things converging at once. I had a starter marriage, is what I call it. I was with this person from the time I was 23 until I was 28, and he was definitely verbally and emotionally abusive. And I picked someone I thought if I loved him enough, I could make him happy. He was an art director, he was an artist, he was struggling. I believed in him. See, it was like I would see all the potential in someone, but not in my own self. And in hindsight, I could see that I was someone who wished I was expressing my own things and I had belief in my own gifts instead of just helping other people do theirs, right? So my marriage was awful. I was working on Seventh Heaven at Spelling television show back in the day there. I'd been at Spelling for a couple years. Um, and I just at work I was excelling, but I hated going home. Like I was scared to kind of go home at some point. And then on a separate shoot for a show, an art director walked up to me and she said, "Do you know that every day at 3 o'clock you cry?" And I said, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And I had hired this person. I was annoyed that they were talking to me like I wasn't their boss, right? I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Every day at 3 you cry. I think you probably need some therapy. Here's my therapist." And she gave me a card. And I made a face like if you're just listening, you can't see I'm making a smug like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And then I walked into the bathroom at 3 o'clock and I was crying and I had no idea. I had no idea because every day at that point I just kind of fell apart, but I was so dissociative about it that I was like, "Oh my God." And so that woman was a gift in my life. And I called that therapist and I started looking at myself. And it took a long time to have any self compassion. And I started to identify the massive losses in my life by that point. Um, I think I think there's a saying that I learned when I was in like high school that really famous people usually have a traumatic event in like when they're young that helps propel them to fame. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, the statistics were amazing." Well, by the time I was 23, I had been assaulted, right? That's how I lost my virginity. I lost my home to a fire and I lost my home to an earthquake.
Wow.
And I didn't tell anyone what happened to me, like with the assault. Like I kept that secret because obviously it was my fault. Right. So, like, I had all of this guilt and shame and so much confusion about like what it is and who I was and what were emotions and what oh and my dad is an alcoholic. And so like what do you take with that soup? And I'm not a victim mentality person. So like where do I go with all of this and how do I move forward? Like, who am I going to be? So I remember calling my starter marriage's mother and saying, I can't be married to him anymore. And she's like, I understand. On our wedding day, she told me I shouldn't do it.
Wow.
I know I thought she was awful, but now in hindsight, I realize she knew her son. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So it was all of those things. It was all of those things that I had felt erased. I didn't know who I was, and that I decided I was going to choose. I wasn't going to be what people needed me to be anymore.
Mm.
And so I was like, kind of like, all right, what am I going to do? And then I balls
Yeah.
to the wall did because like that's again who I am, right? Like I was just like, no, I'm going to do it. So I worked on myself. I was still in the industry and I was producing then smaller things, like, doing fine. But I was like, I want to get back to writing because I hadn't written in quite some time. And took a few classes and I was awful because I had lost it. If like I was rusty and awful, but it didn't matter. Like I reconnected and found curious people who wanted to get better at writing too. And it was like such a nice place to land.
Yeah, I guess it's also kind of slowly finding your voice through your creativity. I mean, it doesn't have to be, saying your story out loud. It can be
Mm-hmm.
writing something or somehow channeling your energy into something that is also yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super powerful. Wow, yeah. And then kind of the journey from that, what came from those classes to then eventually writing a book.
Oh, I love this. So, I mean, I've written a bunch. I think so. I started in fiction and travel writing, and then I think I still call him a friend. His name is Todd Goldberg. He's like a New York Times bestseller, whatever. And I remember he critiqued a short story of mine. It was about the big bad wolf getting out of jail early for good behavior. That's very much I like the magical realism. And so I remember he read it, and it's very much not his storytelling. So he was like, see this sentence is excellent. Everything else has to get this good. Basically, he told me my writing was shit and do better.
Yeah.
And then he's always like, oh, that sounds like something I would say. He's like, you should take Amy Bender's class. She writes many books. She's also magical realism. And I did. I took some classes with her. I was like, oh my God, she speaks my language. She sees the world like the way I do. And then I had the bubble of other stories, and I was like, well, maybe there's other stories that I don't know about. What about memoir? And I dove into memoir writing and devouring everything I could read on that. And I was not quite ready, and I didn't have the distance to write that story. And then someone's like, you should meet Rachel Resnick. And she's wild and amazing. And she lived in this place in Topanga, and we would meet on her porch and just look out into the mountains. And these like amazing women came in, and I went on writers' retreats with her. And it just opened my mind. And she's like, you should just try young adult fiction. And then I was like, okay. So I took a short story that I had written, and then it blew up into this book that ended up getting me my agent. Um, So, like, I think you have to go along for the journey and explore. So, since then, I mean, I've been selling essays, personal essays for like over a decade, like 2 decades now. And I love that. I think it's harder to sell them. It's not exactly a money maker, right? But it's a passion project. I love those moments when you can express something in such a way that you see it land. You know what I mean? Like that. So
Mm.
that's with that. I'm getting ready to start a memoir, another one. I've got 2.5 books full draft on my desk right now.
Wow, just keep flowing
Mm.
out.
Yeah, I am not happy when I don't write.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people listening will resonate with that, whatever your channel of creativity is, or whether or not when you're not creating something. If you're somebody that does loads of different things, I think we'll all resonate with the we're not really ourselves or not fully happy when we're not creating something. I think also when you're really a creative person, the creative energy has to go somewhere. Otherwise, it has to express, otherwise it depress. That's why I
I
say.
love that. 100%. I think, because I am a solopreneur, right? And I have my intuitive healing lane, right? And like my book for that as well. So when I'm working with clients or marketing or doing all of that stuff, it's not the same brain as the creative part. And for 2 years, I didn't really write that much. And I was like, nah, that's unacceptable. I need to go back to it. So it's okay to take breaks. We're not always super creative. It's also okay to not love what you're doing. I got plenty of things that have never seen the light of day, right? So it's all sometimes we're working our way right to the place we need to be.
Yeah, I definitely experienced that too. When I kind of switched from being a fashion designer to being a yoga teacher, and then went back to doing both at the same time. But there was a period of time where I was just teaching yoga all the time. I was also working as a massage therapist, and it was like I didn't really have that thing that I was creating for myself. And it took a long time for me to realize. And it wasn't like when I say it was when it's not expressed, it depressed. I wasn't actually depressed. I just felt like there was something was missing, or there was a
Yeah.
part of me that I had left behind somewhere along that journey. Like I loved what I was doing. I loved teaching yoga, still love teaching yoga, will teach yoga forever. But now I realize that I have to also have something that I'm creating as well. Because otherwise, yeah, it does feel like I've just sort of left part of myself behind somewhere along the journey.
Yeah. Like I paint, I'll sketch. I'm not good, but sometimes I just want to try something new, right? Like one of the classes, the writing classes I took, she made us read these bizarre books. And I mean, some of the words I didn't even know. I was like, I don't know what these words are. I don't even understand what they're saying. They were very esoteric, very, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe them. I was like, what is this? But it made my brain think in a new way. I think you and I were talking a little bit about community, and you were saying that some of your friends were in the same place, right? So I have one critique partner. She and I have been together for like oh my God, a long time, many, many years. And she's really good at pushing me. We write very different stories. So sometimes when I give her notes, I was like, I am not a science fiction reader. I don't read sci-fi books, but that's what she does. And so I'm like, how can I'm like, this is where I have a question. This is where I think you have something. Sci-fi has to get into details to build world build, right? So, but we also know how to push each other, right? Oh, this is maybe not in the right order or whatever. And that relationship's amazing because even though we've been together for a long time, we still can see each other's weaknesses. And because we don't write and do the same things, we don't fall into that. I'm going to call it a lull. She was in another writers group where people kept taking her character names and like she's like, am I crazy? I'm like, no, they're totally taking your plot. Like, what is that? It's so crazy. I love writers' workshops and I highly recommend them either online or in person. I mean, in person every time if you can, just
Yeah.
because of the exchange of energy and ideas and getting pushed. Right. I'm turning my head to my left. I have an entire shelf of craft books, and sometimes I devour them and sometimes I hate them. Right. So, depending on where you are and what you need, I think it's really important in whatever it is that you do to learn, keep learning.
Yeah, keep learning and also keep playing, because creative
Mm,
energy is the energy of play, right? And I think also
yeah.
to um keep a wide focus on what you're doing in terms of that play. So what by that I mean, you know, reading the craft books instead of maybe reading a book that is in a similar genre to yours, because then you don't get caught in that trap of consciously or subconsciously kind of taking on
Mm,
that kind of method of writing or whatever. If you're a painter, maybe experiment with dance for a bit instead of going to painting classes, or instead of just painting, because or even for the people that you follow online, I
yeah.
find if you're following a bunch of people on Instagram or TikTok or wherever that do the same thing as you do, you it will inevitably, without even trying, take on some of their voice, creative voice or actual voice. Whereas if you're kind of having your kind of ecosystem of influence is a lot of
Yes.
stuff that's not related to what you actually do. I think that's where real innovative ideas can come from.
I
And
also love like art and music for that. Like when I go to a museum, I'm a big fan. Just to see how someone else is interpreting the world around them. I mean, you were saying you were in Spain. I mean, I went there a long time ago, and it was Cecily Brown's art was up at La Reina de Sofia. And I had only ever seen her work as 2 inches. And when I walked in, it was 20 feet by 15 feet and 40 feet by, and I started crying because I was so overwhelmed by the scope and scale and the energy. And I was like, yes, thank you very much. Like just yes, or seeing different architecture, hearing a different language. It
yeah.
all stimulates. Like I'm very obsessed with South Korea, like their literature, their music, like the whole thing. But I find, again, like I write magical realism when I write fiction, and they have a lot of the elements that I have in my storytelling in theirs. I was like, I love the idea that like, in a past life that I was there and like somehow I just kept it. That's just so fun.
Who knows? You never know, maybe.
I don't know.
And how about kind of like now you're balancing both the writing with a new kind of channel through your healing work. So where
Mm-hmm.
did that come from, your own healing journey from everything, or was it just what
Right.
was kind of
So
the
if you
catalyst for that?
ever, right, if you told me, hey, Holly, like you're going to be an intuitive healer and help, I'd be like, nah, man, go keep going. No, that's not going to happen. But just like the rest of my life, I had always had my gifts. I just didn't know that you didn't. It's my normal, right? Like this. So I got to like, I would always kind of know things or get information and joke around and be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then I decided to kind of hone my gifts to control it more. So instead of being a random feeling or whatever, I I got good at asking for information and sharing it and reading other people, right? Like I don't really read myself. They don't give me a lot of information on myself, which is annoying. If I could just be honest, just annoying. Because I would like to know some things, right? Like I know don't take that road or whatever, but like not like this is going to happen or that, right? It's not really what my gifts are. I'm an empath and clairvoyant and clairaudient and all those like fun things. So what happened was I got sick and I had to have surgery. And when I woke up from the surgery, it was quiet. And it's like literally because they took an energy center, my second chakra had to come out. So I was like, I woke up and I was like, no. And this is why so many people are lonely. They don't feel what I feel. So I got really serious about healing my body and being attuned. And for the years before that, I was like all writing all the time. And then I was like, oh, this is fascinating. And I literally said out loud, I was like, oh, someone in my 60s, when am I in my 60s? Maybe I'll do this for other people, like I'll just, get an office, we'll just show up. And literally the next day, and I was in my 40s, by the way, um, the a friend of a friend was like, "Hi, I know someone who's looking to share an office. Do you want to do what you do in their office?" What did I say? Sure. And I just started completely insecure and afraid that I wouldn't be able to do what I wanted to do. And now I've been at it for almost I don't know, almost 10 years, right? Um, and so now again, it's changing. Like, how do I want to keep doing like this gift? I love being able to help people reclaim their voice. Like, isn't that what we're talking about? Your artisticness,
Yeah.
your voice, your passion, how to like stand up for yourself and own it, create boundaries, all the things you have to do as an artist, no matter what your art, you have to create some business acumen. You have to know contracts. You have to cover your ass. You have to like learn these things because we've all been burned. And if I can help you not get burned the way I was, I'm here for it. right? Like, I want that for you. I think more voices and more creativity only raise the vibration of the planet. And so, what I love about the writing community, or at least my experience of children's writers, is that they're like, oh, have you met my agent? Do you know this person? Have you talked to this person? They are such a generous group of people, where, in contrast, my writer friends in LA weren't generous. It was more of a threat. Everything's like a threat. I don't know if it's like that now. I haven't been there, obviously, for a long time. So now I'm in a place where I had a TEDx talk. So I'm taking my voice and my stories, and I'm trying to combine it with like that healing. I'm trying to like create this new thing, and I can't really wait to see what it becomes. You don't always have to know the outcome, which I know is really hard because, like I said, I'm a planner. Um, and I really do like, I have 4 notebooks of printed, like I told you, those books. And I'm like, they're staring at me, making me feel guilty. I need to finish that. Um, I think I just hadn't decided how I want to publish, like which way I want to go, which is why they've sat there. But I think the combination is just evolution.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess it's kind of similar to the journey that I've taken in a kind of a similar kind of way. I think through what you're doing with your intuitive healing, what I do with coaching, it is encouraging people to unlock their true voice. Because I think a lot of us, as I say, you can kind of surround yourself with people if you're in like that kind of like fighting for your way to the top
Hmm.
mentality that a lot of us have that you kind of experience in LA. And I definitely, not so much in fashion, to be honest, less than you'd think there was, but maybe that's because I was always just completely not going with the crowd ever. It's just, I've been like that with everything.
Hmm. Same.
um, so maybe I was unaware. You never know. Um, but there are in a lot of industries, especially within like the acting industry and things like that, it is just sort of muscle your way through and muscle your way to the top, and with music and things like that. But I think that actually teaching people to, instead of caring what the crowd are doing and caring about having to kiss ass your way to the top, um, why don't you just uncover your true voice and allow
Hmm.
that to be a magnet for what you want? And I think that it's a powerful thing to kind of give that to someone when maybe they don't even realize that they need it.
I'm really curious about the notions of fame, right? So fame was a specific way when I was younger, right? I had this, do you know the actor Forrest Whitaker at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was a PA. I was a production assistant on a movie with him, and I had to drive him home one night. And he was notoriously introverted on set, and everyone found him quite challenging. But I cannot talk and not be uncomfortable, right? Because my introvert is all good with that. So he got in my little Honda, I'm driving him home. And he asked me, he's like, so, what do you think of like LA? And we were talking about a conversation of weight. So in LA, I was a big girl. I'm not a big girl. I'm not, right? But in LA, especially in the 90s, you had to be a 00. It was the time where your head was the biggest part of your body, super unhealthy. I was like, yeah, like I'm like so tired of people. I'm like, I'm a production assistant. Why do you care? Like what? Like what is that a conversation? He's like, yeah, I know the feeling because I'm sure he had conversations about like, what he like looked like. And then he's like, so what's your dream? And I told him I want to pull up to the Oscars in an open air Jeep. And he just thought that was funny. He's like, anything else? I said, yeah, I think I'll know I made it when there's a story in the Inquirer about me about having an alien baby. And I remember him like looking at me like, what is that? I was like, because it's harmless, right? The Inquirer like used to be like daily man. What is it? Anyway, it's garbage. It's garbage full of lies and stupid stories. And I was like, I just thought it was funny, an alien baby. It doesn't hurt anyone. It's harmless, but somehow my name is out there. I think when I work with some bigger people who have quite a lot of following, they're so unhappy because they have to live up to this thing or manage this thing, and they monetize every part of their life. And I am a big proponent of not, like, you will not see my family on my social media ever
Mm.
because that's private. That's my life. And I'm not selling that. I mean, I'll write about it in my essays, but you won't see me, right? I'll just like do my little snippets, but I don't use them to promote anything else. And I find fame nowadays is such a double-edged sword because it's so easy to receive hate. I wrote an essay about my father. I write a lot about him, about how he has gone on trips around the world, but he hasn't come to visit me in 10 years, but he'll tell me he misses me like every day. And I sold that. And the amount of hate comments I got on that little essay were astounding. And I was like, see, this is why I'm not really interested in a bigger thing. That amount of energy from that low vibration is just not anything that I'm interested in.
Yeah, for sure. I have some like similar experiences from when I was, well, when I was younger, when I was around 17, I used to, I was live growing up in London. At that time, you could sneak into fashion
Mm,
shows and like fashion week parties and stuff with loads of like really famous supermodels and singers now that were like, now they're huge, but at the time they were not, they were barely known. And
mhm,
we kind of look at each other like, how did I get here? How did you get here? I don't know. And kind of, I met a lot of, well, saw a lot of celebrities around that time, but also when I worked as a massage therapist, I used to work in five-star hotels and I
mm,
would meet a lot of celebrities and a lot of really rich people or really quote unquote successful people through that. And I would say the happiest ones that I met were the ones that have a filter for and are really, really strongly boundaried about what they will put out and what they will not. Um, like some that I've met at the real height of their fame, and they were so deeply unhappy. It actually made me feel quite sad to be near them um, and to kind of take on their energy through my hands.
mhm,
And it's wild, but it's something that everyone's kind of, I think, thinks that they want. But the thing that I've come to realize, I mean, that's never something I wanted, but the thing I've come to realize through working with loads of people and kind of observing a lot of people is that we don't want any of that. No human really wants that. You want the experiences that that can give you. You want the kind of maybe the level of um, applause or kind of
mhm.
to put yourself in that, oh, okay, well, then I'll be good enough because everybody will tell me that
Yes.
I'm good enough. So then I can feel fine because, or then I'll feel confident within my talent or within myself because everybody knows my name. Um, but actually, unless you find that within yourself when you're completely unknown, you'll never experience that feeling of being like confident within yourself, within your talent at any point along that journey. And I think unless you're cultivating it within yourself along the way.
Right, because it plays into what you and I was saying before, like that imposter syndrome,
Mm.
right? If you don't feel like you've earned, I think there's a thing I call it, the fuck you is the fossil fuel. Like when I was in LA, I'm like, I'll show you I could do it. I'll show you I can endure it. That'll only ever get you so far, and it will turn you into someone you don't like. Unless you have no awareness in you and you're not spiritual in any level. And then bless your heart, because I don't really want to have anything to do with you. But I prefer and I love meeting creative people who are passionate, and it's okay to own your insecurity,
Mm.
right? Because in any creative process, there's the falling in love with it, working really hard, the edits, the redos, the oh my God, this is a total POS. Why did I do this? Leave it alone. As a writer, sometimes I have to step away from projects. Like I stepped away from one book for years. And I'm like, no, this
Yeah.
is worth saving. How am I going to save it? I don't know. I got to get it back to it. Like, and then all of that. So no one sees all of the work. I think before I did one book, I printed out all the pages and I took a picture of all the pages it took to get to whatever that, and it was just stacks of paper, right? The creative process, one of the hardest things is we don't get paid most of the time for the in between, right? Like, we're not typically getting paid to create the product before the product exists. We have to
Mm.
be self-motivated. We have to love ourselves enough and believe in that muse that we hear and have in us. We have to honor the amazing ability that you have and just enjoy it. And I think that everyone struggles with, right? Like, it would be so much easier to pay to play, or just, I mean, being paid and then like, oh, you need this, and just creating something. But
Mm.
those are a little different, right? They're not always 100% you. You're creating a product to meet a need. So I think anyone out there who's listening, with your music or your heart and your hands and your vision and like all of that energy, I'm so glad you're doing it. I'm so glad you're doing it, because you make the world better because of that.
Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes we think that that's like what's the word? Like something that's not enough, or not something that
Yeah.
is big enough or sparkly enough or shiny enough. But actually, like bringing your vision to life in whatever that might be, or creating that thing that you create, you never know the impact that can have on somebody. And I say that
Mm-hmm.
a lot. We think often, I think we get stuck in this trap of maybe it's not significant enough, this thing that I'm trying to put out there. But you actually have no idea the impact something can have on someone if they see themselves in that thing that you create, in your book, in your character, in your dance, in your music, in your painting, or whatever. And they might not even know it themselves, but they might just become obsessed with the thing that you create from, and I don't know why, and that's also valid and cool and enough, for
Yeah.
sure.
I was at a recent event, and it was like a lot of bankers and lawyers, and they just looked at me, not understanding anything that I do. And I just look at them and they just feel so heavy to me.
Mm.
I'm like, where's the joy? Not that being creative is always joyful. We all know it's got its pits, but I just think we're not all meant to be the same. And when we look back in history and we dig things up, we find artifacts, and those are art and jewelry and pottery and the things of life that made it beautiful. And
Yeah,
there's value in that.
yeah, for sure. What a lovely little sentence to end with, I think. I hope you all listened to that bit a few times. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Holly, for coming on the show. Such a pleasure to have you here. I'll of course put all the links to where everyone can find you in the show notes, but just for people to search and stalk appropriately already, where can everyone find you?
Come find me on Instagram and tell me that you heard us here. I'm at Holly Hughes Intuitive.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
coming on
you.
the show, and thank you everybody for listening. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Maverick Mind. I hope that you've loved it, and if you have, I would appreciate it so much if you would subscribe and write a 5-star review on wherever you're listening to this podcast from. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, I invite you to join me over on Instagram at maverickmindco, or on my website maverickmind.elliefoden.com. And I'll see you in another podcast very, very soon.